morning to you. We're going to be in Judges chapters 17 and 18 this morning. So if you want to keep your Bibles open there. Next Sunday is the Sunday before Thanksgiving. It's the Sunday of Thanksgiving week. So we're going to take a break from Judges next Sunday. And we're going to focus on a devotional on Thanksgiving. And we will have all our song leaders leading songs then, and we'll have some scripture reading. And I'll have a short devotional about Thanksgiving. So this week, let's prepare to bring our sacrifices of Thanksgiving with us next Sunday. And I hope that that will be meaningful for all of us as we think about what God has done and as we are thankful to Him. And as Scott mentioned, a week from this Tuesday, which is the Tuesday of Thanksgiving week, we're having our midweek service that night, and that's a singing night. So hope you will think this week about things that you're thankful to God about, and we come together next week and we join in our praise and our thanksgiving of God. So we're in Judges 17 and 18. This is begins the last big concluding section of the book. 3 sections, big sections of the book. The first section is in chapters 1 and 2, and it's a 2-part introduction. The first part there is 1:1 through 2:5, and then it picks up in 2:6 and goes through 3:41. So that's the first big major section of the book of Judges as an introduction, but notice it's 2 parts. And then the heart of the book is 3:5 through 16:31, and that's where it's about the life and times of some judges. Not all the judges. I mean, sometimes it's just a mention of a judge and their name. But, the big ones, Gideon and Samson and Deborah and others. Then we've come to this conclusion, which is also a 2-part conclusion. The big conclusion is 17:1 through 21:25. That's the last verse of the book. And we're looking at the first part of the 2-part conclusion here. And this parallels the 2-part introduction. So you have an introduction with 2 parts, and then we have a conclusion with 2 parts. So we'll look at the first part of this conclusion today, and that's chapter 17 and 18. And there's some unique things here in the bigger section, 17 through 21, in the conclusion. One is, no foreign oppressor or nation is mentioned. Earlier we've had like the Moabites, the Philistines, the Canaanites, the Midianites, Amalekites, all of those. Well, there's no foreign oppressor mentioned in these chapters. The enemy here is not those nations, but the enemy from within. As in the reading that Jackson read there, we have the people of God who are now making idols. And in contrast to the introduction, where they're dealing with the idols of these pagan nations, here again, they're making their own idols. And so that's one thing that sets this apart. Another thing that sets it apart, in general, the people are worshiping God. Notice his mother says, I'm giving you back this silver, and I'm dedicating this silver to God to make an idol. And so the people in general are worshiping God, but they're worshiping God in an improper way, or a pagan way. And it's like the Israelites at Mount Sinai in Exodus 32, when they make the golden calf. They don't make the golden calf to replace God. They make the golden calf because they want to represent God, which is really ironic because God said, you shall have no representation of me. You shall have no images of me. Another thing that makes this conclusion unique is no judges are named or described here. That was in the big part of the book. Another thing is the reader is repeatedly reminded that during this time period, there's no king in Israel, and so everybody did what was right in their own eyes. I'm not going to go and read all those, but that's in 17:6, 18:1, 19:1, and then the very last verse of the book, 21 and 25. That statement is only found in this conclusion section, that there was no king in Israel, and everybody did what was right in their own eyes. And you remember Samson, when Samson tells his parents that he has seen this Philistine girl, and she is right in my eyes. Get her from me. That's the same phrase. Well, the whole nation's doing what's right in their own eyes. And that's we'll talk more about this in a minute, but that's in contrast of what's right in God's eyes. Another thing especially about 17 and 18, chapter 17 and 18, the author here withholds some information, critical information, until the end of the chapter, of chapter 18. It's something he could have told us earlier, but he doesn't tell us that until the end of the chapter, and that really makes a dramatic impact. So the author here, he could have said, well, this is sinful, and this woman is making this idol, and her son is setting up this temple. He generally avoids making editorial comment and saying this was sin to Israel. You do have that statement, everybody's doing what's right in their own eyes. So we're expected to see that this is sinful. And there's some things that his readers should have in their minds and in the background is that statement. Remember, that statement occurs over and over. And there are also subtle indicators of sin. And remember the history of Israel up to this point. And then he's going to draw from some passages. And we'll mention these in a minute. But like Exodus 20 and Deuteronomy 5, that's the giving of the Ten Commandments, the 10 words. And also specifically Deuteronomy 12 and Deuteronomy 27. He expects his readers to know those passages, because if you know those, then you see the nation here is deliberately breaking what you have there in Deuteronomy. Okay, let's look at the first part of chapter 17. So, as Jackson read, there's this man, he lives up in the hill country, Ephraim, and we're told his name. His name's Micah, and he stole some money from his mother, 1,100 pieces of silver, and she uttered a curse on the thief. Maybe she suspects he's the thief, doesn't know he's the thief, but when he hears that curse, then he confesses, and he says, I took that money, and then she says, blessed be the son, or be my son by the Lord. And so, as we said, verse 3, she takes the money and consecrates it to God to make an idol. And her son sets this up in his house. So pick it up. Let's pick up our reading in verse 4. So when he returned the silver to his mother took 200 pieces of silver, gave them to the silversmith, who made them into a carved image and a cast metal image. And they were in the house of Micah. And the man Micah had a shrine, and he made an ephod and household idols, and consecrated one of his sons so that he might become his priest. In those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. Now there was a young man from Bethlehem in Judah, of the family of Judah, who was a Levite, and he was staying there. Then the man left the city, Bethlehem in Judah, to stay wherever he would find place. And as he made his journey, he came to the hill country of Ephraim, to the house of Micah. Micah said to him, where do you come from? And he said to him, I am a Levite from Bethlehem in Judah, and I'm going to stay wherever I may find a place. Micah then said to him, stay with me, and be a father and a priest to me, and I will give you 10 pieces of silver a year, a supply of clothing, and your sustenance. So the Levite went in. The Levite agreed to live with the man, and the young man became to him like one of his sons. So Micah consecrated the Levite, and the young man became his priest and lived in the house of Micah. Then Micah said, now I know that the Lord will prosper me, because I have a Levite as a priest. So we're introduced to this man named Micah. He's not the model son. His mother is not an illustration of Proverbs 31 kind of a woman. He's stolen 1,100 pieces of silver. And it's interesting, that's the same amount that the Philistines gave to Delilah when she was supposed to trap Samson. One writer comments, Delilah, the gauge of evil, foreigner, seductress, betrayer, is surpassed by Micah, the Israelite betrayer of Israelite values without reason against the most intimate sphere, the family. Steals the money from his mother. And Micah's mother pronounced a curse on the thief. I mean, maybe she suspects, maybe she thinks he's the one that's taken the money. And it's that curse that causes him to confess and not his conscience. And her curse is different from the curses that God had his people repeat in Deuteronomy 27. So this is one of the backgrounds here. That says, the words may be too small on the screen, but cursed is the man who makes an idol or a molten image or an abomination to the Lord, the work of the hands of the craftsman, and sets it up in secret. And all the people shall answer and say, Amen. Micah says, I have taken. He doesn't use the word stolen. He says, I took. I'm the one that's taken the money. So the mother's problem now is how to reverse the curse. You can't take back the curse. The curse has a life of its own. And so she tries to pronounce a blessing, maybe to neutralize the curse. And so Micah returns the silver to his mother, 1,100 pieces of silver, and she takes 200 pieces of silver, and she says, I'm dedicating this to the Lord so my son can make idols. The two idols that he's going to make, when he talks about these ephod, household idols, are the same words that are found in Torah, that God's people are not to make those idols. So you're going to set it up in his house, and he's going to have these idols they can worship. By the way, Micah's name in Hebrew, the full name is Micah. The short name, Micah or Micah. And the AH there is Yah, or the Lord. And his name means, who is like the Lord? There's nobody else like the Lord. So you hear here we have somebody whose name means, who is like the Lord? There's nobody else like the Lord, who's making idols and setting it up in his house. It becomes like a little shrine. It's said there that he made, in verse 5, an ephod, E-P-H-O-D. We're not exactly sure what that is, but earlier Gideon made one and set it up in his house. An ephod referred to the priest's breastplate thing, and so some suggest maybe it looked like that, of just an idol of a breastplate that they would worship. He made these household gods. These household gods are like Rachel stole from Laban's house in Genesis 31. These are personal idols. They wouldn't be huge. They'd be little small idols. A lot of these have been discovered. There's one. That's Baal. And in the time of Elijah, later on, almost every house, archaeologists have discovered almost every house in Jerusalem had one of those. So they would set it up. You know, that's their household idol. So Micah is already an idolater. Now he's a thief. Thanks to his confession to his mother, he now has more idols, more gods, and so he has a collection, so he needs a priest now. And so he dedicates, he consecrates his son to be a priest. And then the author makes, as he said, a statement that he makes it for the first time, that we see several times in the conclusion, that in those days Israel had no king, everyone did what was right in their own eyes. That's in 17:6, 18:1, 19:1, and then the last verse of the book. Everyone did what was right. Now in Deuteronomy 12, God explains the meaning of those words. He says that everybody was doing what was right. That's not the way that pleases God. You're not to do that today, as Moses tells the people in Deuteronomy 12, verse 8. And then in Deuteronomy 12, verse 28, he says, be careful to obey all these things. And he says, do what is right, or good and right in the eyes of the Lord your God. It's a little bit different in the translations, but the same words are there in the original. So you're doing what's right in your eyes, but you should be doing what's right in God's eyes. Doing what's right in your eyes means living according to your own personal standards. Doing what is right in God's eyes means living according to the standard of God's word. So Micah and his mother are not living according to God's commands. And they knew these, but they're doing what's right in their own eyes. So he now has a shrine, has idols set up in his house. He has a son who is his priest. And by the way, he's in the land of Ephraim. Micah's not a Levite, so his son's not a Levite. So he could not be a priest. Then, as we read in the text there, a young, unemployed Levite happens to wander by Micah's house. He came from Bethlehem. He lived there for a while. By the way, there's a Bethlehem connection in these last couple of chapters. Ruth happens during the time of Judges. It's set in Bethlehem. The last couple of episodes in the book of Judges are tied in with Bethlehem. So here's a Levite wandering around. The Levites didn't have land. They had some villages, some cities, but he's wandering around. It appears the people weren't taking care of the Levites, so he's wandering around. He's unemployed. He's trying to find a place, and he couldn't find anywhere in Bethlehem, and so he ends up in the hill country of Ephraim, and it's what somebody has called Micah's bed and breakfast. And for whatever reason, Micah's house seems to be situated where people traveling by stop in. We're going to see that later in another episode. And so Micah asked the Levite, where'd you come from? Why are you passing by my house? And the young man may not have handed Micah his resume, but he does tell him, I'm looking for a job, looking for anything. Now Micah is probably thinking, how fortunate. I have my own shrine. I set my son up as priest, but he's not a Levite. Now here is a Levite who can be my priest. I can hire him. And in today's terms, maybe he offers him a good salary, a car allowance, health insurance, retirement. And the young Levite says, that sounds good. He's willing to give up faithfulness to God, to serve now in an idol setting. And over time, the text tells us a close bond occurs. It says in verse 10 that he's like in verse 11, that the young man became to him like one of his sons. So Micah becomes like a father to this priest. Things are going well. And Micah then says, the last verse of chapter 17, now I know that the Lord will prosper me because I have a Levite as a priest. But things are going to change, and it's not going to be for the better for Micah. So look at chapter 18. In those days there was no king in Israel. So there's that phrase again. And in those days the tribe of the Danites was seeking an inheritance for themselves to live in. For until that day an inheritance had not been allotted to them as a possession among the tribes of Israel. So the sons of Dan sent from their family 5 men out of their whole number, valiant men from Zorah, Eshtaol, to spy out the land and explore it. And they said to them, go explore the land. And they came to the hill country of Ephraim, to the house of Micah, and stayed overnight there. When they were near the house of Micah, they recognized the voice of the young man, the Levite. And they turned aside there and said to him, who brought you here? And what are you doing in this place? And what do you have here? He said to them, Micah has done that, has done this and that for me. He's hired me, and I've become his priest. Then they said to him, inquire of God, please, that we may know whether our way on which we're going will be successful. And the priest said to them, go in peace. Your way in which you're going has the Lord's approval. So the 5 men departed, came to Laish, saw the people who were living in security in the way of the Sidonians, quiet and unsuspecting, for there was no oppressive ruler humiliating them for anything in the land. And they were far from the Sidonians and had no dealings with anyone. When they came back to their brothers at Zorah and Eshtaol, their brothers said to them, what do you say? And they said, arise, and let's go up against them. For we've seen the land, behold, it's very good. And will you sit still? Do you hesitate to go? To enter, to take possession of the land. When you enter, you will come to an unsuspecting people with a spacious land, for God has handed it over to you, a place where there is no lack of anything that is on earth. Then from the family of the Danites, from Zorah and Eshtaol, 600 men, armed with weapons of war, set out. They went up, camped at Kiriath Yearah in Judah. Therefore that place was called Makanah Dan. To this day, behold, it is west of Kiriath Yearah. And they passed from there to the hill country of Ephraim and came to the house of Micah. Then the 5 men who went to spy out the country of Laish said to their kinsmen, do you know that there are in these houses an ephod and household idols and carved image and cast metal image? Now then, consider what you should do. So they turned aside there and came to the house of the young man, the Levite, to the house of Micah, and asked him how he was doing. Meanwhile, the 600 men, armed with their weapons of war, who were of the sons of Dan, were positioned at the entrance of the gate. Now the 5 men who went to spy out the land went up and entered there. They took the carved image, the ephod, the household idols, the cast metal image, while the priest was standing at the entrance of the gate with the 600 men, armed with weapons of war. When these men entered Micah's house and took the carved image, the ephod, the household idols, the cast metal image, the priest said to them, what are you doing? And they said to him, be silent, put your hand over your mouth, and go with us, and be to us a father and a priest. Is it better for you to be a priest to the house of one man, or to be the priest to a tribe and a family in Israel? The priest's heart was glad, and he took the ephod, the household idols, and the carved image, and went among the people. Then they turned and left and put the children, the livestock, the valuables in front of them. When they had distanced themselves from Micah's house, the men who were in the houses near Micah's house assembled by command and overtook the sons of Dan. Then they called out to the sons of Dan, who turned around and said to Micah, what's the matter with you that you assembled together? And he said, you've taken my gods, which I made, and the priest, and have gone away. What more do I have? So how can you say to me, what's the matter with you? Then the sons of Dan said to him, do not let your voice be heard among us, or else fierce men will attack you, and you will lose your life and the lives of your household. So the sons of Dan went on their way. And when Micah saw that they were too strong for him, he turned and went back to his house. Then they took what Micah had made and the priest who had belonged to him and came to Laish, to a people quiet and unsuspecting, and struck them with the edge of the sword, and they burned the city with fire. And there was no one to save them, because it was far from Sodom, and they had no dealings with anyone. And it was in the valley which is near Beit Rechob. And they rebuilt the city and lived in it. And they named the city Dan, after the name of Dan, their father, who was born in Israel. However, the name of the city was previously Laish. The sons of Dan set up for themselves the carved image, and Jonathan, the son of Gershom, the son of Manasseh, he and his sons were priests to the tribe of the Danites until the day of the captivity of the land. So they set up for themselves Micah's carved image, which he had made all the time that the house of God was in Shiloh. Okay, I know that's a long reading, but just as this wandering Levite looking for a place to settle, here's now a wayward tribe looking a place to settle. And there are a couple of background information I think is important to see here. One is, we've already been told in the book of Judges why the tribe of Dan didn't fully possess their inheritance in the land. That's in Judges 18:1. It says, in those days there was no king, and in those days they were looking for a place to settle because they had not yet had a place to call their own. And that's consistent with what we have. And in Judges chapter 1, it says the Amorites are living in the area of the people of Dan, and it says the Amorites didn't allow them to live in the coastal plain. So they're not successful taking what God had given them. They can't take the Amorites. Why not? Well, because they don't trust God. They can live, in the mountain. They can't have farmland. And so they send out 5 spies. We need some more land. Another part that's important about the background information here is they're sending out spies. Well, in Israelite history, is there anything about anybody else sending out spies? Yeah, of course. In Numbers chapters 13 and 14, that's when Moses sends out the spies to the land of Canaan. And they come back, the majority come back and say, well, yeah, it's a land flowing with milk and honey, but it's fortified. People are giants. We can't take that. And then Joshua and Caleb, the minority, say, it is a fortified city. It's a city that's filled with milk and honey, but we can take it with God's help. And then later in Joshua chapter 2, Joshua sends out 2 spies. So this idea of spies being sent out is something that's not foreign here. This nation, tribe of Dan, sends out these spies. So there's a contrast. Numbers 13 and 14, Joshua chapter 2.